Israel is going to be celebrating the Shmita 2022. Well, it actually starts October 2021, October 2022. So Vince asked us to do some, let's all do some research and see, is it really the Shmita? Because do we know when it's actually going to take place? After Israel went into captivity for 70 years and, wasn't this kind of timeline lost? So we've gone off a bit from our other studies of the prophets, show us at the timeline, and we're going to use a session to look at the Shmita for those who want to keep it. And can we tell when it is? And if we can tell when it is, what do we do about it? Not living in Israel. Is it something that's relevant to us? Alright, so the meaning of the Shmita. What does the word Shmita mean? Is this something you can eat? Is it a foreign language? What is it? So the Shmita simply is a Sabbath year. What does a Sabbath year mean? God is very interesting in the way He sets up things. He likes cycles. God likes cycles. We have a weekly cycle. We have 6 days work, 1 day rest. We have a cycle within the year, our feasts. We have 7 feasts. We have a Shmita cycle, which is a cycle of 7. We have 6 years of work, 1 year of rest. Okay, talking about the land. Then we have a bigger cycle, that's the Jubilee cycle, which is made up of 7 Shmita cycles. So there will be 7 years times 7, so 49 years. You'll have 7 Shmita cycles, a 50th year Jubilee. So this 7th year is a time of rest specifically for the land, but it's also known as a year of release. Okay? It's a year of release where slaves are set free, where anyone in bondage is set free, and also debts are reset. Well, not sure I say reset, but actually released. So Shmita is also called the Shevat, which literally means the 7th. So the 7th year. Okay, year 1, year 2, year 3, year 4, year 5, year 6, year 7. Alright, so also like the days of the week, they weren't labeled Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. It was labeled day 1, Sunday, day 2, day 3, day 4, day 5, day 6, and Shabbat. So Shmita, 7th year. Guys, we're going to have also interaction, so if you want to bring in anything, let's have a discussion. I think this is, you guys are welcome to input anything or ask questions as we go on. For those who can't see the screen, if you want to move this side, here's your chance, so that you can see, because we're going to be working with there. Going once, going twice. Okay, salt, alright. Everyone's good. Okay. No Sunday on Shabbat, so we'll just, you guys are fine. Okay, any questions on that?
I just thought of it now. I guess the Shin, the Mem, and the A in it, Shema.
You want to say that a louder? So Mark's saying within the word Shmita, it has the Shin, the Shin, the Mem.
Basically, it's pronouncing Shema as well.
It has the Shema in it, okay? So hear and obey, the Shema, hear and listen. I think it's very relevant. So, where do we find this Shmita thing in the Bible? You guys can turn with me to Exodus 23, verse 10 and 11. This is the first place we hear about the actual Shmita. I think we have allusions to the 7-year cycle, which we'll get into just now, earlier on, but we will just look at the actual direct references to the Shmita here. So Exodus 23. Verse 10 and 11. 6 years you shall sow your land and gather its produce, but in the 7th year you shall let it rest and lie fallow, that the poor of your people may eat, and what they leave the beasts of the field may eat. In like manner you shall do with your vineyard and your olive groves. And then the very next verse, 12, it says, 6 days you shall do your work, and on the 7th day you shall rest, that your ox and your female servants and everyone may refresh themselves. They may rest. So it's really tied into this rest year. And what we see from this verse is it's really about giving to the broader community. Alright? If there are poor among you, and you're in a position of privilege, and that poor person owes you something, and it's a brother, are you able to release them so that they don't have this weight on them as God has released us, set us free? So it's really giving back. And you let your land, if you're a farmer and you have a lot of land that you're farming and your trees are producing lots of fruit, that year you don't harvest. You can eat of it, but you leave it and you open up your gates and you say, come, anyone that wants to take, come and eat. I think it's a really beautiful picture of how God wants us to be with the people around us. The next verse we can look at is Leviticus 25, 1 to 7. So all these portions are going to sort of paint a picture for us of what the Schmitter is really about. Okay, so Leviticus 25 verse 1. And the Lord spoke to Moses at Mount Sinai, saying, Speak to the children of Israel and say to them, When you come into the land which I give you, then the land shall keep a Sabbath to the Lord. 6 years you shall sow your field, and 6 years you shall prune your vineyard, and gather its fruit. But in the 7th year there shall be a solemn rest for the land, the Sabbath of the Lord. You shall neither sow your field nor prune your vineyard. What grows of its own accord of your harvest you shall not reap, nor gather the grapes of your untended vine. For it is a year of rest for the land. And the Sabbath produce of the land shall be food for you, for your male and female servants, your hired men, and the strangers who dwell with you, for your livestock and the beasts that are in your land. All its produce shall be food for them. Shall be food. So this isn't a year of gain, but it's a year of giving. A year of going, God, you have blessed me so much that I can take the opportunity to give back. Whether it's financial blessing, whether it is health, whether it is relationship, whatever, it's not always just a financial thing. But because we have God and He has blessed us and He is our provision, this is a reminder that it's not your provision. Remember, on the 6th day, when they were in the wilderness, God provided what? Manna, but twice the amount that they needed for the 6th and the 7th day. This is a picture of the Schmitter. God saying, if you keep this, I will provide more than enough for that year and the years to come. It's actually a blessing for you. For you, by your life blessing others, you get blessed in that. Right, the next portion is Deuteronomy 15, verse 1 to 18, and I think this is the hard one that most people, because people are like, but it's just the farms, the farmers, it's their problem. But it goes much deeper and it hits home with us. So I think this is really the heart of the Schmitter. So verse 1. At the end of every 7 years you shall grant a release of debts. And this is the form of the release. Every creditor who has lent anything to his neighbor shall release it. He shall not require it from his neighbor or his brother, because it is called the Lord's release. Of a foreigner you may require it, but you shall give up your claim to what is owed by your brother, except when there may be no poor among you, for the Lord will greatly bless you in the land which the Lord your God is giving you to possess as an inheritance. Only if you carefully obey the voice of the Lord your God, to observe with care all these commandments which I command you today. For the Lord your God will bless you just as he promised you. You shall lend to many nations, but you shall not borrow. You shall reign over many nations, but they shall not reign over you. If there is among you a poorer man of your brethren within any of the gates in your land which the Lord your God is giving you, you shall not harden your heart nor shut your hand from your poor brother. But you shall open your hand wide to him and willingly lend him sufficiently for his need whenever he needs. Beware lest there be a wicked thought in your heart, saying, the 7th year, the year of release, is at hand, and your eye be evil against your poor brother, and you give him nothing, and he cry out to the Lord against you, and it becomes sin among you. You shall surely give to him, and your heart shall not be grieved. When you give to him, because for this thing the Lord your God will bless you in all your works and all to which you put your hand. For the poor will never cease from the land. Therefore I command you, saying, you shall open your hand wide to your brother, to the poor and your needy in your land. If your brother is a Hebrew man or a Hebrew woman, is sold to you and served you 6 years, then in the 7th year you shall let him go free from you. Remember that word Hebrew means what? It means to cross over. So someone that is part of Israel spiritually, serving God. And when you send him away free from you, you shall not let him go away empty-handed. You shall supply him liberally from your flocks, from your threshing floor, and from your winepress. From what the Lord your God has blessed you with, you shall give to him. You shall remember that you were a slave in the land of Egypt, and the Lord your God redeemed you. Therefore I command you these things today. And if it happens that he says to you, I will not go away from you because he loves you and your house, since he prospers with you, then you shall take it all and thrust it through his ear to the door, and he shall be your servant forever. Also to your female servant you shall do so likewise. What he's saying is, if your slave doesn't want to be released in the 7th year, he becomes a bondservant. If you go to New Testament, you look at Paul says, I'm a bondservant to Christ. He's drawn it from here. I love my master. I love Yeshua. I want to be part of his house. So I no longer am a slave, but I'm adopted now. I become part of that family. Last verse, chapter 18, verse 18. It shall not seem hard to you when you send him away free from you, for he has been worth a double hired servant in serving you 6 years. Then the Lord your God will bless you in all that you do. So from here we really see the heart behind it, is that God is with you when you keep his ways. And it might feel hard for you to release, but remember, everything you have comes from him. It's not ours. When we're born into the world, we're born with nothing. When we die, we leave with nothing. So what we had here is just a matter of managing what he's given, being a good steward. And if God says to do these things, we go, thank you, God, you've given me this, so it should be easy for me to go, this person owes me, or this is my land, I'm going to let it rest. It should be an easy thing to do because we're honoring him, and in honoring him, he blesses us to show the world this is what happens when you're with me, when you honor me, then I will provide abundantly. Any questions, any thoughts, any comments at this point?
I'm wondering if you are going to mention within your
For sure. Yeah, we'll get to that now. Okay, so the question is, if we hire a servant, let's say for instance in the middle of the Schmitter, do we still let them go? I think from this chapter we see that it says, do not harden your heart if you come near the end to release that debt, to give. I think it applies the same to someone like that. Yes. Thanks, Frankie. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, so a biblical answer then, as Frankie says, is that Yeshua gives a parable of the hired servant. The owner of the land goes out, I think 3 or 4 times to get a servant. The one person started, let's say, at 8 o'clock in the morning, and the other started at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, but they all got the same pay. I think that is a very good correlation to this.
There was also, not exactly where it was, but it said that don't harden your heart when it comes to Schmitter and somebody comes for a loan, that you then hold your hand back.
Yeah, it's in Deuteronomy 15.
Yeah, so it's the same
principle. Any other questions? Was there a hand that side? Okay. All right, then the last one we'll look at is also a bit of an application to this, is Jeremiah 34. Where is the Jeremiah in the timeline? They are in captivity. Okay? Well, Jeremiah basically goes from sort of under siege to full on captivity by the Babylonian Empire. All right? Why were they in Babylon? Because for 490 years, it says they did not keep the Schmitter. So because they did not keep the Schmitter for 490 years, they went into captivity for 70 years. Why 70? In 490 years, you have 70 Schmitters. All right? So because of that very purpose, God said, I will let my land rest now for 70 years. I'm going to remove you because you will not yield. You will not be obedient. So I actually have to pull you out of my land to let it rest. There's 70 years. And that's what he did.
It also just shows the importance of Schmitter to God and to his heart.
Exactly.
Because if we put ourselves in that situation, if we are owing the debt, or if we are that slave, how freeing would it be if we've released of it? So it's two sides. It's the release that we would receive, but also the release that we need to give.
Yeah. Did everyone get that? So Bruce was just saying, we all experience debts and the burden of payment. How relieving would that be if that was set free? We were set free from that. And if we are able to do it, God was saying, here in your land, but remember, it is talking about the poor, people that are really struggling. And if he's saying, those people you need to take care of. Baruch Hashem, he provides. So what Bruce is saying is that here, as we're going through the prophets, we see how they were neglecting the poor. How the rich were even trying to steal. They were trying to steal what the poor had. Their little bit of land, their little bit of wages. They were taking them to the judges. They were bribing the judges to judge in their favor. And the poor had no representation and no way to defend themselves. God saw this happening for 490 years and he said, enough of mistreating my people. You're supposed to be brethren, you're supposed to be reflecting me, but you are greedy for self-gain. And he moves in.
It's also no strings attached.
Yeah, no strings attached. I released you and that's it, I forget it. It's like your sin's forgiven. So we'll discuss it a bit more just now. When we get to the end, we'll have a discussion there. I hope we'll have time. We've got 25 minutes left and this is going really quickly. All right, Jeremiah 34, verse 12. It says, Therefore the word of the Lord came to Jeremiah from the Lord, saying, Thus says the Lord, the God of Israel, I made a covenant with your fathers in the day that I brought them out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of bondage, saying, At the end of 7 years, let every man set free his Hebrew brother who has been sold to him. And when he has served you 6 years, you shall let him go free from you. But your fathers did not obey me, nor incline their ear. Now this chapter is quite interesting because what happens is we see in this chapter that it's basically the last king of Israel, Zedekiah. And Babylon is going to take them. And they decide that they're going to keep the Schmitter all of a sudden. So they make a pledge, the wealthy make a pledge that they're going to keep the Schmitter, but then they go back on it. So they decide, we're going to do it, maybe God will give us some relief, and then straight away when it comes to the actual crunch of it, they go, no, we're not actually going to do it. And what happens straight after this? Babylon besieges them for 3 years. They're stuck, besieged, and then on, I think, the 11th year of Zedekiah's reign, so from the 9th year to the 11th year, they besiege. The 11th year, they break in, and Babylon destroys the whole city. They break the temple down, they set it alight, and they trample it. So I think that was a turning point. I think, if they had turned their God, may have given them more time to come right. Okay, so penalties for not keeping the Schmitter. Leviticus 26, verse 33 to 35. It says, I will scatter you among the nations and draw out a sword after you. Your land shall be desolate and your cities waste. Remember, God is telling them this before they even go into Israel. So this is more than 500 years before Babylon takes them. They haven't even conquered the land. They've just been pulled out of Egypt. But God's telling them this. Then the land shall enjoy its Sabbaths as long as it lies desolate, and you are in your enemy's land. Then the land shall rest and enjoy its Sabbaths. God told them, if this is what you're going to do, I'm going to pull you out and the land will enjoy its Sabbaths. But the people don't listen, and God sends prophet after prophet after prophet after prophet for something like probably 150 years. I think it's around 150 years God sends prophets, or even longer, and they just do not turn. There's little bits of glimpse of light, and then it just goes south again. The land was not allowed to rest for 490 years, and this started at Saul. If you go back from when Babylon conquers 490 years, it's within a couple of years. I think if we look at the calendar, I'm not going to get too into depth with with the calendar, and we'll talk a little bit about it. But if we go back with the genealogies and the lifespans, this is actually within Saul's first 10 years of reigning. So I think they had one Shmita Cycle, and then the next one they stopped keeping it. So for 490 years, even during the time of David and so on, they weren't actually keeping the Schmitter as they were supposed to, which is quite crazy. Jeremiah 25, verse 10 to 13. I'm not saying during the time of David they neglected the whole Shemitah. Maybe there were elements that they were keeping, but they were obviously, it was never kept in its fullness from when God told them. So there were things that weren't being adhered to as instructed. So verse 10 from 25, chapter 25. Moreover, I will take from them the voice of mirth and the voice of gladness, the voice of the bridegroom and the voice of the bride, the sound of the millstone and the light of the lamp. And this whole land shall be a desolation and an astonishment, and these nations shall serve the king of Babylon 70 years. 70 years for the 490 years of not keeping the Shemitah. So when is the Shemitah? We're going to have a look at some references and try pin it down. I don't guarantee you anything. We'll have to wait and see to the end. All right, so there is quite an in-depth journal paper. So journal paper is, for those who don't know, is a scientific paper that academics publish in a peer-reviewed journal. So a peer-reviewed journal is basically this paper that they publish goes to other experts in the field, and they read through it and see whether it's valid or not, and then it goes up for debate. So I will give the references for the journal papers that we've looked at for historical evidence. So we see a number of mentions of or allusions to the Shemitah in the Maccabees and in Josephus. Okay, so we've got Maccabees 6:49. It's reported that there was no provision because it was the 70th year. The seventh year. So that was one reference, and that was the year 163, 162 BC. Remember, BC we count downwards to AD, and then we count upwards. So this was a reference. Why 163, 162? It's not saying that it was 163 or 162. Our Gregorian calendar isn't in phase with the Hebrew calendar. So remember, we have we can think of 2 New Years, and we'll come to that at Passover and Yom Kippur. All right, Yom Kippur often being referred to as the head of the year. So that's why it's between 163 and 162, because that's our calendar shifted over. Another reference is Josephus' comments on this in the Antiquities of the Jews in chapter 13, so verse, 235 to 236. He has a reference. Guys, I'm going to give you the papers. Let me tell you, it's not easy reading. You can ask Bruce. The one paper is 45 pages of going through this. And then there's another paper that's a rebuttal, which is about 13 pages or so. It's a rebuttal and comments. So that's another one that's mentioned is between year 135 and 134. In the paper, he goes more in depth about what the comments were and how they relate. So, like I said, we can post the papers on the Idat Bet page for those who want to read through it. All right. All right. Also, in the Antiquities of the Jews from Josephus, it states that the 7th year repose coincided with Herod's first regional year. So that was another reference in 37-36 BC. So this is Herod the Great that he's talking about. Then the Shemitah year of 42 AD date is built up from a number of references mentioned in below references. So in the below references, the guy will build up some of these from allusions to what's happening in terms of wars going on and cycles happening. But it's quite in depth, so I can't go through it all right now. And then the 6970 one, which is the last one I think we got recorded from that time, is that the Shemitah year of 6970 AD date is built up from a number of references mentioned in the below references also, okay, on what was happening, and also that coincides with the destruction of the temple being 70 AD. There are a lot more references. within these documents. So this is just a few. There's a lot of also historical contracts. So there's contracts where someone will have a contract and say, I owe you this debt, and this is the year of, let's say, for I think one of the Caesars, Nero's mentioned, and it coincides with the Schmitter. All right, you guys can look at that. Biblical significance to the Schmitter. So possible significant Schmitter events in the Bible. Now this is quite interesting. A little bit of background. So last year when we got, we got talking about the Schmitter and how can we find it, I started putting together a biblical calendar. So using the genealogies and then taking these Schmitter dates and then extrapolating it backwards and forwards. So adding, we have these Schmitter dates and then adding 7 years, 7 years, 7 years, going backwards, and 7 years, 7 years, 7 years, going forwards, and then taking the genealogies and pasting that next to it and seeing, how does this line up with the Shmita Cycle. So these are just some possible significance. I'm not saying that, for now, I'm not saying that the Schmitter dates are 100%, but I'm going to say these are possible and just interesting. Enoch is taken up on a Shemitah year, a year of release. So remember, once again, I said this is a concept of 100%, but it looks like it coincides with the Shemitah date. The date, the year, if you add the genealogies and you see what the Shemitah is, it looks like it coincides there, which is interesting because it's a year of release, and he is released, he goes up. He doesn't die, he's taken. Remember, Enoch is taken. It says he was walking with God and then God took him. Another one is Abraham leaves his father's house. So from idol worshipping home at the age of 75, looks like it coincides with the Shemitah year. That he is released from that, he goes. Abraham dies on a Shemitah year. I'm not saying it's a good thing or a bad thing. I think it's a good thing to go to be with the father. So he's released from this world. Another one is Joseph is released from prison and made second in command on a Shemitah year, which is interesting because if it is a Shemitah year, what's the new year? The year after that is the first year of the new 7-year cycle. And how many years were there of plenty and how many years of... So it would have been a new cycle of 7, which would have been of plenty, and then a new cycle of 7 of famine. All right. So I think it's just an interesting comment. Well, an interesting point. Another one is the Exodus. The release from Egypt looks like it's on a Shemitah. Okay. So another one is Jehoiachin. So what happens when Babylon comes and I think it's in 605 BC, Babylon comes down for the first time, and they push Egypt back, they conquer Syria, they come into Judah, and this guy was reigning in shame. He was only 18 years old, he had been in power for three months. His father had made a big mess, and he's captured and put into jail for like 39 years. He's 18 years old, and it wasn't even his fault, and he's chucked into jail for 39 years. But then he's released. Looks like on a Schmitter. I think it's 39 years. It's a really long time. Market crashes. This is also some other collaborative evidence that we see, and these are interesting things. I'm not going to say this is because of a Schmitter or it is, but what happens, what quite interesting, we see historical market crashes. We've got the 1973-1974 market, stock market crash coincides with the Schmitter year. The money is released back to the people. Okay, when the market crashes, then all that money in the stock market then is distributed. Black Monday of October 1987. October, the month between September and October is normally what? Yom Kippur. And we'll see just now, this is where we look at the Shemitah actually starts in October. Well, should I say at Yom Kippur. just an interesting one. Stock market downturn of 9th October 2002. Financial crisis of 16th September 2008. These are all Schmitter years. 2015, Chinese stock market crash. Should I say these are all Schmitter years that we think? Okay, and it's just interesting that these coincide. Specifically, most of them are within, just after Yom Kippur, we have these crashes. And as it goes into the Shmita cycle. So conclusion, but not quite the end. Just a quick discussion on what we've looked at. From the above discussion, it seems very likely that the Shmita is from 2022 Yom Kippur to 2023 Yom Kippur. Alright, so what I'm saying is from the papers we looked at, the historical evidence, the collaborated evidence, and so on, it looks like if we had to then count 777, it looks like it's going to start from October this year to October next year. Can we say with certainty that this is correct? No. We cannot say certain because there's no biblical specific reference that says this is the date and this was the Shmita. We don't have that. We don't have a date saying that this was a Shmita. So we can't say 100%, but we have historical evidence and that we can see sort of it looks like this. There's not enough definitive data to show that it is, however, the available data does hold some weight to show that, when we can know more or less when the Shmita is. So, when is the next Shmita? Alright, now the next slide you're going to go ask what? You just said 22 to 23, but why 21 to 22? Yom Kippur to Yom Kippur. And we'll discuss a Yom Kippur now. The reason being is that the leadership got together and we went back and forth with this thing. And what do? We decided because we can't say for 100% that the Shmita is from this October to next October, we would rather be in unity with Israel and with the rest of the world. The rest of the world is celebrating the Shmita from last year October to this year October. And although we can see that there's a lot of weight behind the Shmita starting this October coming to next October, we'd rather be in unity with our brothers that are celebrating it now. So that's why we are keeping to this date. Okay, that's not to say that everyone has to agree. I think it was really a debate and going back and forth on this stuff, and it's not an easy decision, but we can't prove 100%. We can't. So we think it's safer just to keep with everyone and be in unity with that. Any questions?
Who is it applicable to?
We'll get into that. All right.
That's not what I was.
Okay, let's first just touch on why do we think it's October to October. Biblically, there's no reference to when the Shmita starts. There is only a reference to when Yom Kippur starts. And Yom Kippur is on the Jubilee. There's only a reference to when the Jubilee starts. Remember, you have 7 times 7 years, 49 years, and then the Jubilee starts. So for the Jubilees to start, the Shmita must end. Okay, and the Jubilee starts at Yom Kippur. It says at Yom Kippur you'll blow the trumpet and the Jubilee will start. So it makes most sense that the Shmita will start at Yom Kippur and end at Yom Kippur. Okay. And also, not just that, we also went back and forth with this and back and forth a number of times, but it can start at Passover, but then we also looked at the agricultural cycles, and it makes no sense for it to start at Passover because of your harvesting and your planting. It wouldn't make sense for it to start at that time. It would make sense, more sense to start at the end of your agricultural cycle than the Shmita starts. So it doesn't mess up when you've got to plant them for the next cycle. So we've really we spent a long time going back and forth through this thing, and it's not a simple study. It really requires time and effort. Yeah. Yeah. Okay, so I think Frank was saying it makes sense that it's at Yom Kippur because, am I right? You're saying that Yom Kippur starts then, so you need the Schmitter to end so Yom Kippur can start, and to make it's a piece. Yeah. To go into Yom Kippur, you need to, those days need to, we're actually going to touch on that now, to that release and everything happening at Yom Kippur time to go into the new cycle. So it really does make a lot of sense because at Yom Kippur you go through that time of Elul and all of that, building up to forgiveness and making everything right, but then only in Passover you doing the release some months later. So it makes a lot of sense. Thanks, Frankie, for that. All right, so release to who? And who does it apply to? We had quite a discussion about this. I'm going to talk about the debt first. It says your brother, your family. What happens when there is debts that are owed? It becomes a bone of contention between family, and it brings division. So when it talks about this release, this financial, really a financial thing, release your brethren. There's also a condition. It talks about those that are poor or are struggling. Okay, that are, I think I would say more than just poor and struggling. I'd say if it's causing you sleepless nights, it's causing you anxiety, it's causing you stress, God wants you to go. Let it go. Let it go, and then I will supply for you. I will keep your. I will keep you. I will supply your needs. I think all of us have met people or gone through things ourselves where we've been holding on to things for years and years and years, and it just, when you think of that person or you think of that, whether it's something they did to you, whether it's something they owe you, when you think of it, it just puts a knot in your stomach. God doesn't want that. It's a time where you go, I let it go. Cut it off, no strings attached, move forward. Any questions there? Sorry, Sorry? It's I think, a good question. I don't think it would apply in that sense. The reason being is that we had Levitical cities where if someone accidentally, so I'm just guessing this applies the same way. If someone killed someone accidentally, they would flee to a Levitical city to be safe. That means if I accidentally killed someone and their child wants to kill me, I can go to the Levitical city and be safe. And I'm only set free when the high priest passes away, when he dies. So when it comes to maybe if it's small things, I don't know. I don't have biblical evidence. Maybe something we can look into in terms of looking at the Mishnah and other historical artifacts. How did they handle such things? But maybe if it was a small thing, like someone stole something, maybe they'd be set free. I can't say yes or no because I don't know.
So if we take a look, biblically there weren't prisons. If there was murder, capital punishment, you died, right? If you stole, you had to pay back. So if you're found guilty, you had to pay back. This is a release of debt owed in regards to I've taken a loan because I needed to do something, or the case may be, and I'm pressured now to pay it back and I can't. So if you're in a a slave or in servitude or indebted to somebody, it's specifically for that. But if it's prison, you've done something, you've transgressed the law, and that debt needs to be paid. So you wouldn't be around
Yeah.
if it was capital crime, you should be dead. But if it was theft, you need to pay it back, and there was amounts according to specific things you stole. So whether it was 2, 5, or 7 times, depending on what you stole.
Thanks, Bruce. Yeah, thanks for
But
that.
if you couldn't pay that 7 amount, you would have to start as a slave, and then it would have to be set free.
Yes. Okay. So yeah, I mean, I think the Bible covers that.
Yeah.
As
you come down to the master's heart as well, right? Whoever you stole from. So, but interestingly, it doesn't actually talk specifically about that. It seems to be more if it was, above board. If I can do that, it wasn't caused because of theft or something like that.
I don't know if everyone heard Bruce. I'll just repeat it. Basically, so the question was that if you're in prison, how does the year of release apply to you? And as Bruce has said rightly, is that actually there weren't prisons, but those things were dealt with straight away. So if you had murdered, if you had done a capital crime that incurred the death penalty, you would have the death penalty. If it was theft or something like that, you would automatically pay it back. You'd have to pay it back. If you couldn't pay it back, you'd have to work the land, and then I'm guessing that you'd then be released of the year of release. Everyone good with that? I think that actually clarifies it very nicely. Do we need to let the land rest? This is an interesting question that's also went back and forth. Does it apply to us? Doesn't it apply? The command was given to the Israelites when they're going into the land of Egypt, and it says, when you go into this land, you'll let the land rest. Another thing is that we don't see biblically any reference to this being kept outside the land of Egypt. When they were the land of Israel. When they were in Babylon, we don't see any keeping of the Schmitter. And also, if we go back and we look at Joseph, with the 7 years of plenty, the 7 years of famine, I think this is the only reference where we can see them harvesting from the land and harvesting and planting in a land that's not theirs. We don't in that 7 year period there would have been one Shmita cycle, whether it was on the 7th year or in between there would have been a Shmita, and we don't see them keeping that. God said for 7 years you will have 7 years of plenty, so they used the 7 years. Does that mean we mustn't keep it? I can't say. I think you guys need to go in prayer and ask God, is this what you want me to do or not? I think the principle behind it is good. If you're harvesting, planting all the time, and your land dies, you need that land time to recuperate. So pray about it and see if God wants you to do that or not. I don't think there's many farmers around here, but maybe it applies to your own little house stand,
Like Nisha was saying, you just moved into your land, you can't from that, you're first to
No, because what happened in Judges? One of the sins was that everyone did what was right in their eyes, and that caused problems. God has a standard, and I think if we're going to keep the Shemitah, let's not all do what we think is right in our eyes and all have our own calendars and our own. Then it's just disorder. It's chaos. It just brings in division. I think personally, I see it like that. I think as leadership, we stand together on this.
Just on that, it's kind of like moving Shabbat to whichever day you want. I know it's difficult, guys, especially if you're trying to plant your own house and try and get that going. And now this gets through. I know it's difficult, but it's kind of like saying, the Shabbat's not a Saturday anymore; it's a Sunday. Or I work on weekends and I'm off on a Monday because I'm a hairdresser or whatever the case may be. So my Shabbat's on a Monday. No, God says it's this day. So I think it's very clear as well from a year point of view. It's this year. If we take a look what happened when it wasn't kept, all the calamities that happened, and potentially what would have been missed if it was kept. So I think it comes to heart. But also interestingly enough, when we were busy doing this research, if you take a look at guys that are in the world but they're growing organically, what they're now doing is they're not growing the land like they used to, where they used to plant a whole tract of land and they'd always, plant and harvest and replenish the soil through, either whether it's chemically or, horse or cow manure, whatever it has to be. They're now moving like they would, like you move cattle or sheep on a plot. They would move it from parts to parts and let the land rest for a while before they replant. And they say that at a microbial level, that the release that comes back into the soil when you let your land rest actually boosts it, so that it can actually grow bigger, better, faster when you're doing that cycle. So it's quite interesting that the world's picking on it through the organic processes, but God knew this way before already. So you don't know before you bought that land if that land had rested. You don't know what they'd done on it, you don't know what it was and for how long they did it. So it's always nice to see if we have to reset it back to God's principles. And I know it's difficult. I know where you guys are. I know you guys where you are from a family point of view, but you're trying to get going. But I think the value and the reward that God will give if you keep it, because we can see what He did if you did it. It's interesting.
Another part of the question: do we need to let the land rest? Does this mean I'm going to plant everything in pots, and then the next year I'm putting it in the ground?
Well, what he says is that you are not to harvest. So whether it's in pots or not, it's mentioned that. But like I said, we don't see this being applied anywhere but in the land of Israel. And I think if it's personally, you guys are going to have to go and pray about it. Do we need to keep this? For me, the big thing is this release of debts. What is the heart behind what God's trying to do? The whole point of this year was, yes, let the land rest, but it was to open up your gates and feed people. Don't lose the heart behind. Open up your home, let the poor come, let them take, bless them, release people. That was the heart.
As you were saying that earlier, it's like in 6 years you work to enrich yourself. The 7th year, that saving, if you were saving to enrich yourself, the 7th year saving should come.
And what I've heard a number of few testimonies. Sorry guys, we're going over a little. We should be finished soon. Just going a bit over time, but I've heard a number of testimonies, not from Christians, but people living in Israel, when they decided to keep the Schmitter. When there's one particular guy that did tomatoes for McDonald's, their tomato sauce. He said that he decided no, he's not going to keep this. He was thinking about keeping the Schmitter, and then he decided no, he's not going to keep it, and then he planted, and it was a disaster. It was a terrible year for him. Nothing worked. I think all the workers, because they used a lot of Arabs, they all went on strike, and he had so much trouble. And then he decided the next year he had saved enough, and he said, "Okay, I'm going to do it." Again that year, all the people that did it, that planted, they had the worst year ever, like droughts and all this nonsense, and they lost most of their crop, and they lost money actually. He then, when he planted the following year, was blessed so much that he's like, this works, and these are for unbelievers, how much more for those who want to do it to please others' heart, not just for a financial kind of thing. So yeah.
Talk about releasing people was before the releasing of the land.
So yeah, we've got like two different releases that it talks about. If you recall when you read it, says in the 6th year you shall release your slave, and at the end of the 7th year you shall release your debt. So we actually see two releases here. The release of the servants happened at the end of the 6th year because they can't work the land in the 7th year because it's supposed to be resting, so you let them go. Then at the end of the 7th year, that's when you release all the debts. So it's two kind of paths to it.
During a time into potential rapture and
What was the... Yeah.
Sorry guys, when we were going through this, we were taking a look. If you're doing a release of slave or people, what would happen is the person themselves would be released, right? But then, and that's from a slave point of view, but then your debts are released. Interesting, if you take that back in regards to where we are from, you take a look at your 7 cycles in regards to your feasts. You've got Yom Teruah, you've got Sukkot, right? That's also Yom Teruah, you're releasing. Yom Kippur, is the Day of Atonement. So your debts are being accounted for. And then Sukkot, you're actually coming in then and you're tabernacling. If we take a look at creation, 6 days, 7 days, God rested. If we take a look at Schmitter, 7 years, to let your land rest on the 7th year. We take a look at creation, 6,000 years from creation to where we're coming now to the 7,000th year, which is going to be the rule and reign of the Messiah for 1,000 years. Now, if you take a look, we're ruling and reigning with him. We've released potentially rapture, okay, ruling and reigning, and then the judgment that's also going to be coming for the world as well. So it's interesting how this ties up, when we bring it back to Messiah, back to feast, back to what we know is coming through from a prophetical point of view. So God's heart is huge behind this. I know, like I was mentioning earlier, it's not easy. There's no account for any of this being done outside. Once again, what Reeves is saying, outside of Israel. But I think, it's the heart condition that God's looking at. A lot of people can say, well, why keeping what we're doing in the moment? Why wearing tzitzit, why doing this or this for, Israel. But if we take a look, who came out of Egypt, it was the mixed multitude. So if we're engrafted and we're part of, then we need to see what we're going to keep. And once again, take it to prayer. Because, that's what you need to do. It's written, so let's pray about it and let's see what we need to keep.
For the short people. Okay, so from what we can see, this is a command specifically for. Okay, we spoke about the land of Israel, and I mentioned Joseph and the 7 years of plenty. That we don't see it there, but like Bruce just said, pray about it. So should we keep it? Pray. All right, I'm going to then, we are finished. I think, let us pray for those who want to leave. I think then. Okay, so let's put it this way. The announcements, please remember the announcements. I said whoever wants to stay, we're going to pray. Then I think we're going to have any questions and answers for those who want to stay. Let's just wrap up the questions and answers and then we'll do the rest. Is that okay? All right. But Father, thank you for your word, Lord. Thank you that we can discuss these things and see how to follow you better. Lord, we thank you that you are a God of, you give us wisdom, you give us understanding, and you help us to understand these things. Father God, I know that some of these things are difficult and hard to comprehend and hard to actually apply. So Lord, I pray, Father, that you will help us as we've now gone through this and you know what your heart is, that you will give us wisdom. You will show us where we need to apply this in our lives, Father, and that we will be obedient and apply this, Father. And that you'll make it easy for us, Lord. That when we look and we see, Lord, that you all belongs to you. It's not ours, but it's all yours. And that there is such blessing that comes with following your word and making you happy. Bring a smile to your face, Father. That's what a heart is about. That's what our heart is for. Our hearts are to be pleasing to you. So Lord God, I just ask that you will help us through this time. Give us understanding we need, the wisdom we need, and the heart behind it, Father. Lord, I ask that you go before each one here this week, that you protect them and keep them, and help all of us, Father, to keep us set upon you, in this crazy time, Father. There's so much distraction, there's so much happening, that our eyes will just be fixed on you. And that you will give us the love we need for others and the heart that will reflect you in all that we do. Father, please protect everyone, bring them back safely, and make sure I pray. Amen.